It was 2:14 a.m. in London when Ada finally admitted to herself that something was terribly wrong. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, still in her crumpled blue scrubs, the soft hum of the radiator and distant traffic barely touching the storm in her chest. On her phone screen, a paused WhatsApp video showed a building site in Lagos, a rough block wall, a pile of sand, a crooked wheelbarrow leaning at the edge of the frame. Her younger brother's voice floated from the speaker, cheerful and confident, talking about roofing sheets and final finishing. Ada pinched and zoomed, squinting at the image she had done 100 times across 8 long years. Tonight, for the first time, she noticed it. The same broken block near the corner, the same dent in the wheelbarrow handle, the same pile of sand, untouched. Every update she had been sent was the same clip, recycled, reused, repackaged as progress. Her heart began to thud so loud she could hear it in her ears. 8 years of £500 a month. 8 years of overtime shifts, missed holidays and lonely Christmases. 8 years of believing she was building a home that would finally lift her family out of rented apartments and leaking roofs. Now, in the dim light of her tiny room, that dream flickered like a dying bulb. Ada's thumb hovered over the screen as her brother's last message stared back at her. "Sis, we just need small push to roof. God will bless you." For the first time, the blessing sounded like a threat. Years earlier, Murtala Mohammed International Airport had been a sea of noise and heat when Ada left Nigeria. She had stood in a long queue, clutching a faded suitcase and a plastic file of documents, trying to smile through the knot of fear in her stomach. Her father's hands had trembled as he adjusted her scarf, looking at her as if he could not decide whether to be proud or afraid. "Don't forget home," he had said softly, voice nearly drowned by the overhead announcements. "Wherever you reach, remember you are first daughter. Your people are here." Beside him, her younger brother, Chike, had laughed and thrown an arm around her shoulders. "Don't mind Daddy," he joked. "Just make sure you reach there well. We'll manage things here. When money starts to flow, we will build mansion for him." Ada had smiled then, not knowing how heavy those words would become. She had promised them she would send what she could. At the time, what she could meant a few pounds here and there. She did not yet understand how quickly a few pounds could become a duty, and how duty could become a chain. In the first year in the UK, Ada learned the meaning of cold and loneliness in the same bitter winter. Her tiny shed flat smelled of cooking oil and damp carpets. She worked night shifts at a care home, washing elderly patients, lifting bodies heavier than her own, smiling even when her back screamed. At the end of the month, she would sit by the window with a calculator and decide which bill could be late, which meal could be skipped, so that something could go home. The first time she sent money, it was £150 for her father's medication, then £200 for school fees. Gradually, as she moved from care home to NHS hospital, as her pay inched up, the monthly transfer became a fixed figure, £500. Her colleagues talked about holidays, new cars, and savings accounts. Ada talked about responsibility and family, always with a tight smile. Every transfer came with a message from home. "God bless you, Ada. You are our star. Don't worry, we're using it well." For a long time, those words were enough to warm her in the cold. The idea of the family house began simply. One night, during a rare day off, Ada had been on a video call with her father. The connection was bad. His face was a blur of pixels, but his voice was clear. "This rent matter is tiring," he said, coughing between sentences. "If we had our own place, even if it is small, nobody will be pursuing us every year." Something tightened in her chest. She looked around her tiny room in London, at the peeling paint and the small stack of folded uniforms. She thought of all the times her parents had moved when she was a child, packing everything into bags because a landlord wanted more money. "What if we start building?" she asked slowly. Just small, at least foundation. Her father had been quiet for a moment, as if afraid to say yes. Then his laugh came, soft and disbelieving. If God uses you to do that, Ada, I can die happy. The next day, she called Chike. Let's find land, she said. I will be sending money. Make sure everything is in Daddy's name. Her brother's excitement crackled through the phone. Ah, sis, you won't regret this. I know one agent, very serious person. We can start immediately. That was how it began. A generous impulse born from love and guilt, wrapped in the belief that distance could be bridged with money. The pattern set in quickly. At the end of every month, Ada would stand in the tiny staff changing room, phone in hand, and send £500. A few hours later, her brother would respond with photos or short video clips, men mixing cement, blocks stacked neatly, the outline of a building slowly taking shape. He narrated everything like a foreman. Foundation done. We've gone to lintel level. Next month, we will start roofing. Ada collected those images like trophies. On difficult shifts, she would scroll through them and whisper, "It's worth it," as she walked down fluorescent-lit corridors. When her colleagues asked if she ever planned to buy a place in the UK, she would shake her head. "First, I have to put my family in their own house," she would say. "After that, maybe." But over time, the updates became less frequent and the explanations more complicated. Sand is expensive now. Cement price has gone up. The workers are delaying. Every delay was a new reason to send just a bit more. Every reason scraped against her nerves, but she swallowed her doubts. It was easier to imagine progress than to confront the possibility of betrayal. When her father fell ill, the house project became more urgent and more chaotic. Messages from home started arriving at odd hours, reports of hospital visits, tests, and prescriptions. Ada began sending more than £500, cutting deeper into her own life. She cancelled a short trip she had planned with colleagues, stopped contributing to her small savings group, and took on extra shifts. Her brother's tone shifted. The casual jokes that used to pepper his messages disappeared, replaced by constant pressure. "If Daddy is to rest well, this house must stand," he told her. "Village people are watching. They know you are abroad. We can't disgrace ourselves." Photographs arrived of a half-built structure with wooden scaffolding and dangling wires. In some, an older man in a hard hat posed next to the blocks, his face partly turned away from the camera. "That's the engineer," Chike said. "He's even pitying us. He says once we roof, Daddy can be brought home like a king." Those words stabbed at Ada's sense of duty. Guilt and love braided together tightly around her throat. She pushed down her questions and sent more money. Despite everything, her father died in a rented apartment, not in the promised house. The night he passed, Ada sat alone in the hospital staff room after her shift, phone pressed to her ear as sobs echoed from across an ocean. Amid the grief, she clung to a single consolation. At least, she thought, his body would leave from the house she'd built for him. That belief kept her upright in the days that followed. It also made the lie that awaited her even crueler. When Ada stepped out of the arrivals hall in Lagos, the heat slapped her in the face. The air felt thick, loud, familiar. Her family was waiting. Cousins, aunties, in-laws, all crowding around her with tears, ululations, and phones held high to record the London daughter coming home. Her mother clung to her, shaking with grief. Chike embraced her like a man with nothing to hide. "You are too thin," he laughed hoarsely. "London has used you. Don't worry, you will rest now." In the car, as they drove away from the airport, Ada pressed her forehead against the window. watching the city blur past, new billboards, half-finished flyovers, the same yellow buses. Her heart pounded with a mixture of sorrow and a fragile excitement. "Tomorrow, I want to see the house," she said quietly. "Before the burial, I need to stand in it." There was a tiny pause in the car. She almost missed it. "Tomorrow?" Chike said, his tone suddenly careful. "Let's see how things go. The road there is not good now. Rain really damaged it this week. But we'll manage." It was a small wobble. She noted it, then pushed it away. She told herself she was being paranoid. Grief made everything feel more intense. Once she stepped on site and touched the walls, she believed all of this unease would disappear. The days before the burial were a blur of visitors, wailing, cooking, and tradition. Every morning, Ada would wake to find new people sitting in the living room, hands folded, voices dropping as she entered. Her mother moved like a ghost between pots of jollof rice and coolers of drinks, her eyes red and distant. Ada tried again and again to bring up the house. "Chike, let's go today," she would say. "Even if the road is bad, I don't mind." Each time, a new excuse appeared. The engineer traveled. The key is with the site manager. The workers are cleaning up. Let's just focus on burial first. At the same time, Ada could not ignore what was in front of her. Parked in the compound was a shiny SUV she had never seen before, its paint almost blinding in the sun. Her brother's wife moved around the house in expensive-looking lace and heavy jewelry. There was new furniture in the sitting room, a large TV in the corner, and always enough food to feed an army. One afternoon, as she helped in the kitchen, a neighbor said quietly, "Your brother has really enjoyed these last few years, oh? You people over there are trying." The woman's tone was not admiration, it was something closer to accusation. A crack opened in Ada then. She began to see the house not as a solid thing in the village, but as a shifting image made of words and carefully edited videos. The more she asked, the more the people she loved shifted their eyes away. The night before the burial, Ada lay awake on a thin mattress in her old room, the ceiling fan clicking quietly above her. The house was finally silent. Somewhere in the compound, a generator hummed. She reached for her phone and stared again at the construction videos. The same wheelbarrow, the same broken block, the same angle of sunlight. The weight in her chest became unbearable. Without fully deciding to, she got up, slipped into a simple dress, and tiptoed out of the house. The gate creaked as she eased it open. Outside, the street was dark, lit only by a few weak bulbs and the occasional passing bike. She walked to the junction and flagged down an Okada. "Where?" the rider asked. She gave him the name of the village and the landmark her brother always mentioned when talking about the land. Her voice shook, but she kept it steady. As the bike sped into the night, wind whipping at her scarf, Ada felt something inside her harden. If the house existed, she would see it. If it didn't, she needed to know now, before she buried her father while living a lie. They turned off the main road onto a narrow, rough path. The rider grumbled, but she urged him on, pointing into the darkness. Finally, they stopped in front of a plot of land. There, under the pale moonlight, stood a half-finished shell. Block walls rising to half height. No roof, no windows, no plaster. Weeds grew between piles of sand. There were no workers, no tools, no sign of recent activity. The structure looked abandoned, not delayed. Ada's knees almost gave way. 8 years of sacrifice stood before her as a hollow skeleton. The Okada man watched her quietly. "Madam, na here?" he asked. She swallowed, eyes burning, heart shattering. "Yes," she whispered. "This is it." The next morning, Ada sat at the edge of the burial canopy, dressed in mourning cloth, hearing condolences but not feeling any of them. Her mind was still at the site, at the cracked blocks, the wild grass, the silence that wrapped around that ghost of a house. Every sorry for your loss sounded like sorry for your foolishness. She watched her brother move easily among the guests, shaking hands, smiling, accepting praise for being the man of the house now. When their eyes met, something passed between them, something sharp, electric, and dangerous. He looked away first. Ada knew then that what lay ahead would not be a misunderstanding or a minor mistake. It would be war. In the days after the burial, village gossip did what secrets feared most. It wandered. Ada had always known that in her hometown, nothing stayed hidden for long. While she sat with older women in the compound, hands busy with peeling yam or sorting rice, words floated through the air, sometimes by accident, sometimes on purpose. "Your brother really tried when you were a whale," one woman said. "That's your land matter. He was always arguing with boys at the beer parlor about cement price." Another laughed. "Arguing with whose money?" she replied. "If my own sister is in London sending pounds like rain, I too will be arguing." They thought Ada did not catch the edge in their voices, but she did. Later, a distant cousin pulled her aside. "Sis Ada, don't be angry," he murmured, eyes darting around. "You know this village, people talk. They say the money you are sending, not all of it is going to that land. They say there is another land somewhere else that your brother is doing something on. Please, just check things well." The words sank into her like ice. There was not just negligence at stake now, but the possibility of another house, another plot, another project her money had built without her name on it. By the third day after the burial, Ada stopped hinting. She walked into the sitting room where her brother sat with two uncles and switched off the TV, ignoring their protests. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady. "About the house. All 8 years of it." The uncles shifted uncomfortably. "Ada, is it now?" "Yes," she cut in. "Now. I went to the site last night." Silence fell like a brick. Chike's body stiffened. "You what?" he asked. "I went," she repeated, "and what I saw there does not match 8 years of 500 naira. So you will bring out every receipt, every contract, every proof of what you spent." He laughed then, but there was no humor in it. "Sis, be calming down. You don't understand how things are in Nigeria now. Cement is not like before. Inflation." "I understand numbers," she snapped. "We are not talking about 1 year. We are talking about 8. Bring the receipts." Her insistence cut through the room. Uncle's eyes darted between them. Nobody moved to support her. The air grew thick with the unspoken rule: family problems should be covered, not exposed. Finally, with a shrug that looked too casual, Chike got up. "Fine," he muttered. "If it's receipts you want, you will see receipts." The receipts came in a dusty folder, produced the next day. Ada sat at the dining table, spreading them out like cards in a rigged game. Dates, amounts, scribbled signatures of engineer, block supplier, sandman. Some were barely legible. Some were clearly photocopies of the same original, with different dates written on top. Names of companies that a quick online search later suggested did not exist. Her head pounded. "This one," she said, tapping a slip. "Why is the same phone number here, under 3 different company names?" Chike shrugged. "People share numbers." "And this contractor," she pointed at another. "You said his company is in town. I checked. The address you gave is a bar." He smacked. "You're abroad, Ada. You don't understand how we do business here." The phrase sliced through her like a blade.
You don't understand. It was the same accusation she had been dodging for years. That distance disqualified her from questioning how her money was used. But now she was done dodging. If I don't understand, she said quietly, then you will explain it to me in front of someone who does.
The confrontation quickly turned into a family meeting. In the sitting room, plastic chairs were lined up. Aunties, uncles, even a family friend or two took their seats. Ada stood on one side, holding copies of the receipts she had photographed. Chike stood on the other, hands in his pockets, eyes hard. An elder cleared his throat. Ada, we know you have done a lot for this family, he began. Nobody denies that. But money issues can cause misunderstanding. Your brother says there is inflation. Cement that was 200 is now... I am not stupid, she replied. I've done the maths. Even if everything tripled, what I saw there is not equal to what I sent. Murmurs rippled around the room. Someone muttered, she is talking to elders anyhow now because she has seen small money. Her mother stared at the floor, silent, tears gathering in her eyes. Look, Chike said, stepping forward, wearing a wounded expression. All these years, have I ever come to you to complain? Have I not been the one running around, dealing with laborers, dealing with land people, fighting for the family? And now you come back from London to insult me, to say I ate your money. You did, she said, voice shaking. At least some of it, because there is no other explanation. He scoffed, turning to the others. You see, she doesn't understand anything. In her mind, building house is like ordering pizza. You send small money and expect mansion. She has forgotten how we suffer here. Those listening shifted, some nodding. The narrative was shifting quickly. Ada, the ungrateful, distant daughter. Chike, the misunderstood man on ground. Pressure closed in on her from all sides. Don't disgrace your mother. You should lower your voice. This boy has tried. For a moment, Ada felt the ground sway. She was close to doubting herself, to wondering if she was indeed overreacting. Then she remembered the weeds growing inside the half-built walls, 8 years of her life swallowing rain and sun without a roof. Her doubt turned to steel. Ada went to an internet cafe in town and printed her bank statements. Line after line, month after month, the transfers were there. £500, £600, sometimes more. Beneath each one, her own notes. House, dad's meds, cement money. The totals made her stomach flip. She laid those papers out on the same dining table, this time with her mother present. This is what has left my account, she said softly. It is not imagination. Her mother's eyes moved over the figures slowly. With each number, her shoulders sagged. From a neighbor and the same cousin who had warned her before, Ada finally heard the rest. Her money had not just gone into that abandoned shell. There had been another plot of land, bought quietly in another name. There had been investments, loans to friends, business attempts that failed, school fees for children that were not hers, a car paid for in installments. Every time Chike had said we, he had meant him. The house she thought she was building for her father had been only one of many things funded by her sacrifice. It might also have been the least important to the person spending the money. Standing over the papers, Ada felt something break. Not like glass that shatters once, but like rope that has been fraying for years and finally snaps. When the extended family gathered again, the mood was different. There was less denial now. The numbers had spoken too loudly. Still, instead of apology, they offered something else, a solution that reeked of manipulation. Everybody has made mistakes, one uncle said. Maybe your brother mismanaged some things, maybe he trusted wrong people, but this house is all of your legacy. Let us not throw it away. Ada listened, arms folded, heart pounding. What are you suggesting? She asked.
We should move forward, another elder answered. Let the past be the past. If you can still help small, send money again so they can at least roof the place. Once there is roof, we too will contribute. We must not allow your father's memory to suffer. For a split second, the old reflex in her stirred, the urge to fix, to carry, to pay so that others would not be disappointed. If she sent just a little more, perhaps they would finally finish. Perhaps the shame could be covered and the village would stop talking. Perhaps her father's name would not be tied to an abandoned structure. This was the temporary hope, the seductive idea that one more sacrifice could heal what 8 years of sacrifice had not. Then she saw it. In her brother's eyes, in the slight relax of shoulders around the room, in the way someone said, "You know Ada, she has a soft heart," as if she was not there. They were counting on her to do what she had always done, give in, pay up, and swallow her hurt in exchange for fragile peace. The bigger threat revealed itself clearly. If she agreed now, this cycle would never end. Her life would remain an open tap, her guilt and love turned into an endless stream of money. This was not just about the house anymore, it was about the rest of her life. Ada straightened, her voice calm. "No," she said. The word dropped like a stone in a well. "Excuse me?" an elder asked. "No more," she repeated. "There will be no more money for this house. Not from me, not 1 naira, not 1 pound. If anything is to be done from now on, it will not be with my sweat." Her mother began to cry silently. Chike's face twisted. "So that's it," he shouted. "After all we have done, you want to abandon your father's project? Because you have small pounds now, you think you are bigger than us?" She met his anger with a steady gaze. "You abandoned it first," she said. "You just didn't tell the truth." The room erupted in voices, accusations, pleas. But inside, Ada felt something new. A hard, quiet certainty that she was finally stepping out of a trap. That night, alone in her room, Ada stared at the ceiling until dawn. By morning, she had made a decision that required a calm face and a betrayer smile. At breakfast, with the family gathered, she spoke in a gentle tone. "I've thought about what everyone said," she began. "Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I didn't understand how things have been here. You are right, I don't want Papa's memory to suffer." Relief visibly passed around the table. Her mother's shoulders loosened. Someone murmured, "Thank God." Chike watched her carefully. "So, what are you saying?" he asked. "I'm saying we will discuss how to move forward," she replied. "Let me go back to the UK, arrange my work, and see what can be done. For now, let's focus on mourning properly. We'll talk more later, calmly." Smiles appeared. The atmosphere relaxed. To them, it sounded like a surrender, a return to the familiar script. Only Ada knew that this was not peace. It was a pause. As she packed her suitcase days later, sliding her printed bank statement into a folder, she made a quiet promise to herself. There would be more money involved in this story, but the next time it would not be leaving her account, it would be coming back. The act closed on the image of her boarding the plane, face expressionless, while her brother waved from the airport car park, believing he still had control. He did not see the new hardness in her eyes. Back in the UK, Ada returned to the same narrow bed and the same thin walls, but she was not the same woman who had left. She worked half shifts, nodded politely to colleagues, and went through the motions of life, but something sharp and focused had awakened inside her. The part of her that always said yes had gone quiet. In its place stood someone who was ready to draw lines. On a rainy afternoon, she sat at her small table with a notebook, her bank statements, and a list of names and numbers from home. For the first time, she was not calculating how much more she could send. She was calculating how much she could get back.
Ada began asking questions, not just of family, but of professionals and acquaintances. A colleague from another ward, also Nigerian, listened to her story during a break. "You know this thing you went through is not new," the woman said. "People's own siblings, even parents, have built houses in their own names with diaspora money. Some just cry and move on." "Is that what you did?" Ada asked. "No," the woman replied. "I got a lawyer. The money was too much to just cry about." Ada took note. She spoke to a church member who had once mentioned dealing with property fraud back home. She searched online for legal practitioners in Nigeria who handled land and construction scams. She learned that even in family matters, there were contracts, petitions, and court processes that could turn misunderstanding into a formal case. For the first time, she realized she did not have to choose between being a good daughter and protecting herself. She could still love her family and refuse to let them steal from her. That realization was her true turning point. Ada's next steps were quiet but decisive. She visited her bank and asked detailed questions about standing orders, frequent transfers, and the ways she could protect her account. Anything that had once gone automatically to Nigeria was cancelled. Alerts were set. Doors that had been wide open for 8 years were slammed shut. Then she contacted a lawyer in Nigeria, a modest village lawyer recommended by the same cousin who had hinted about the second plot. Their first conversations were cautious. She laid out the facts, the transfers, the abandoned house, the possibly diverted funds. "You understand," the lawyer said slowly. "This is family." "I understand," Ada replied. "I also understand theft." They drafted a formal letter, a demand for account, for statement, for explanation. It was written in firm but controlled language, mentioning potential legal action, petitions, and exposure if satisfactory answers and partial repayment were not made. When the letter was sent and acknowledged, Ada felt a small, fierce satisfaction. For the first time, her brother would face something he could not wave away with jokes or "you don't understand." The reaction from home was immediate and volcanic. Her mother called, voice shaking. "Ada, what is this?" she cried. "They brought one letter here, talking of lawyer and court. You want to send your brother to prison. Is that what your father would have wanted?" Aunts and uncles followed, calling from different numbers, some pleading, some scolding. "You have taken this too far. Family doesn't do this to each other. Do you want outsiders to be laughing at us?" But in the background of those calls, Ada heard something else. Fear. From a cousin, she learned that Chike had been running from house to house, trying to gather support, insisting he had done nothing wrong. Some relatives sided with him, saying Ada was proud now. Others shook their heads, muttering that he had overdone it, that he should have been more careful. In the village square, whispers began. They say lawyer is involved. Over house money? This one has passed normal family quarrel. The old unwritten code of silence had been broken. There was no going back. A week later, Chike called. For 2 days, Ada watched his name flash across her screen without picking up. On the 3rd day, she answered. His voice sounded smaller than she remembered. "Sis," he said, "so this is where we have reached?" She stayed silent. "See," he continued, "I will not lie. I made mistakes. I used some of the money for other things. But we are still family. Let us settle this between ourselves. I can pay back small. I have some things I can sell. Just tell that lawyer to calm down." It was the first time he had admitted anything. The words, "I can pay back," fell on her ears like a fragile promise. For a moment, Ada felt a softer path open in front of her. If he repaid even part of it, perhaps the house could be finished later, or the money used for something else. Perhaps the public shame could be avoided, the village gossip muted. Once again, temporary hope appeared, dressed as compromise. But as he spoke, old patterns fell neatly into place. Promises now, vagueness later. Small repayments that would stretch into years. Half-truths that would eventually turn into, "you are stressing me," and "after all I have done." And beneath it all, the same expectation that Ada would lower her demands to keep the peace. She realized that the greatest threat was not losing the money. The greatest threat was losing herself, bending again until she no longer recognized the woman who had found her voice. If I drop this now, she thought, he will learn nothing, and I will go back to being a walking ATM with a guilty conscience. Her decision crystallized. "You will pay back," she said slowly into the phone. "Not small as you like, properly. And not just because I am your sister, but because you took what was not yours." He scoffed. "So what now? You want to disgrace me in front of everybody? Is that your plan?" "If that is what it takes for you to understand boundaries," she answered, "then yes." Months later, Christmas approached. Despite the tension, Ada booked a flight home. She did not do it to surprise them. The lawyer had already sent notice of a planned meeting. Everyone knew she was coming. When she arrived in a village square on Christmas Eve, it was buzzing with life. Children in new clothes, music from distant speakers, the smell of fried meat and dust in the air. But when she walked through, conversations dipped, then slowly resumed in hushed tones. She carried a neat folder in her hand. Inside were copies of her bank statements, the lawyer's letters, and photographs of the abandoned site. Her mother watched her from the compound doorway, eyes full of pain and something like reluctant respect. In the family meeting that followed, under the shade of a large tree, Ada sat on one side of a worn wooden table. Her brother sat opposite, flanked by two uncles. On another chair, the village lawyer adjusted his papers. This time, there were no jokes. "As we said in the letter," the lawyer began, "we are here to seek resolution. Miss Ada has provided evidence of substantial funds sent for a specific purpose. The result on ground does not match. We need clarity." Chike opened his mouth, then closed it. The eyes on him were not just family now. They were community, witnesses. Ada looked at him steadily. "This is your chance to tell the truth. All of it." The stage was set. At first, her brother tried one more time to twist the story. "I didn't eat the money," he insisted. "I invested. Some things failed. Some things are still coming. The land is there. The house is there. It's just not finished." But the more he spoke, the more contradictions emerged. Dates did not line up. Descriptions changed. When the lawyer asked direct questions, his answers grew thinner, weaker. Then, a man from the crowd, a local mason who had once worked on the site, stepped forward. "Let me talk," he said. "Work stopped on that house years ago. We didn't see money again. We called him, he stopped picking. We moved on." The words fell like a hammer. A murmur rolled through the gathered neighbors and relatives. Faces turned towards Chike, not with admiration, but with disappointment and anger. The elders shifted uncomfortably. The protection of quiet had been stripped away. Ada opened her folder and laid out her papers on the table for all to see. Numbers, dates, amounts, witnesses. "You did not just mismanage," she said, voice low but clear. "You diverted. You lied. You wore my sacrifice as new clothes and car tires. You let our father die in a rented house while you used his dream to fund your lifestyle." Her brother's shoulders sagged. The fight left his eyes, replaced by something like shame, or at least the realization that the room no longer believed him. Under the pressure of the lawyer's presence and the community's witness, an agreement was finally reached. It was not perfect. Nothing could erase 8 lost years. But a list of assets to be sold was drawn up. A timeline for partial repayment was set. The abandoned house would be documented formally in her name. She signed the papers with a steady hand. In that moment, it was not about the exact naira figure. It was about shifting the balance of power. After the meeting, as the sun dipped low and Christmas lights flickered half-heartedly around the square, Ada walked away from the crowd. Her mother caught up with her, placing a trembling hand on her arm. "You have changed," her mother whispered, half accusation, half awe. "Yes," Ada replied gently, "and this time I am not apologizing for it." She looked back at the compound where she had grown up, at the faces that had once seen her only as a source, a resource, a solution. She knew she would always love them, but love, she had learnt, did not mean unlimited access. At the gate, her brother stood watching, expression unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met. "There will be no more money from me without strict agreement," she said quietly. "No more, just trust me. Those days are finished." He opened his mouth, then closed it, swallowing whatever he wanted to say. Ada stepped out into the dusty street, the night air cool against her skin. Ahead of her lay a future that was uncertain, maybe even lonelier, but it was hers, no longer built on the assumption that she must bleed to keep others comfortable. The story did not end with everyone reconciled, or the house finally shining with paint and tiles. It ended with something stronger. A woman who had moved from selfless, silent sacrifice to clear, uncompromising boundaries. And somewhere between London and Lagos, between duty and self-respect, Ada had finally built the most important home of all, the one inside herself.